Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Blinken, for appearing here today. The meeting earlier this week of the leaders of our two main strategic competitors demonstrates the continued urgency of our nation having a diplomatic corps that is second to none. I thank you for your efforts to make this a reality and look forward to engaging more to support our ongoing progress towards this goal. I want to start with my concern with the PRC's actions across the Indo-Pacific, from the Mekong River to the South China Sea to the Pacific Island nations. And it's no secret that the PRC is using economic coercion and expanding their diplomatic presence in this key area. And reality dictates that countries in this region cannot ignore the PRC's presence and proximity. And yet, I still hear from our allies and partners about how the United States remain a strong partner of choice. And you've mentioned this before. I also hear from Southeast Asian partners specifically about how central ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is to their regional identity and as a shield against dominance by foreign powers. My colleague, Senator Merkley, mentioned the importance of ASEAN and the roles that it plays beyond an economic organization. For example, the work that it is doing to hold Burma accountable for the fine points concerns. And in February, I led a CODEL to Jakarta to engage with ASEAN as an institution and with the Indonesia bilaterally. There I saw firsthand the eagerness of our partners for more, not less, U.S. engagement, particularly on economic affairs. Secretary Blinken, can you provide a candid analysis of your department's relationship-building initiatives with key allies and partners in Southeast Asia, particularly with organizations like ASEAN, and in particular ASEAN itself, and explain how this budget will improve our ability to advance our Indo-Pacific objectives?
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the question. First, just very quickly, as you know very well, this is a critical area for us. We've got 50% of the world's population in the Indo-Pacific. We've got 60% of its GDP. We have a region that is driving basically 75% of economic growth over the last 5 or 6 years. So this is vital to us. As it happens, China invests about 50% of its assistance programs and its economic and diplomatic resources in the Indo-Pacific. So we have to be there, first and foremost, and that goes to the efforts that we're doing, and the chairman referenced it at the start. We may not be able to match China person for person, but we're going to be engaged in ways that we haven't been. We're significantly increasing our diplomatic presence in the Pacific Islands. As you know, we've opened to the Solomon Islands. We're looking at other embassies in Tonga and in Kiribati. And at the same time, we have very significantly re-engaged ASEAN, including President Biden, having an extraordinary summit meeting with the ASEAN countries precisely because we think it's an important institution for working together to deal with some of these challenges. At the same time, this goes back to the budget, we want to make sure that we're appropriately resourced so that when it comes to countries throughout the region that have interests and have needs and may be looking to us to be a strong partner, we actually have something to offer. And it's less about, as I said, forcing them to choose. It's more about giving them a choice. And the budget is really designed in that way when it comes, for example, to having the resources to invest coherently in infrastructure, to dealing with building climate resilience and adaptation. The Pacific Island countries, of course, some of them literally at risk of no longer existing if they're not able to deal with that. We have the programs in place, and the budget supports that to be able to do that. But also their own diplomatic and political weight is important. And marshaling that on a given problem, whether it's Burma or whether it's some of the actions that China engages in that they don't like and we don't like, there is much more power and effectiveness in engaging these issues together than there is any one of these countries doing it alone. That's why ASEAN itself is important. One of the things that they've worked on for years, as you know, with China is a code of conduct in the maritime space. I think China's been dragging that along for a long time. We tried to help reinforce that. For example, the State Department put out last year the definitive legal analysis of all of the maritime claims to basically help countries push back against some of the egregious assertions by China in their maritime space. In very practical ways, as I mentioned earlier, we're working to give them the tools and resources to have better what's called maritime domain awareness. They have better visibility on their own seas and oceans. For example, to detect illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, which is devastating economies and livelihoods in a large part of the region. So across a whole series of things, we are working together, and the budget attempts to reflect the importance of that work.
Does the budget include an increase to our mission to ASEAN?
I don't know if it actually has an increase in what's needed for the mission. I believe that we're appropriately resourced, but let me come back to you on that. And if you've identified any deficiencies, I'm happy to hear them. We sent someone very experienced, very close to the president, to be our representative to ASEAN, and who was the executive secretary of the National Security Council, who's been doing a terrific job. I've engaged repeatedly in person, as well as, of course, remotely with all of our ASEAN colleagues and with ASEAN itself.
And I would hope that our ambassador to ASEAN is given all the tools he needs to do the job, and I don't think he has all the resources that he needs. So I would love to review the budget with you on that. Thank you. Can you also elaborate more? You touched on this, how the economic initiatives in the budget include both newer initiatives such as Outcompete China and the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, as well as ongoing efforts like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework will advance our policy goals in the Indo-Pacific regions. Drill down a little bit more. I know I'm getting into the weeds, but I'm very interested.
No, I think it's important. So we have a number of programs that we propose to fund in the budget to counter some of the challenges posed by China in the region. For example, on supply chain dominance, one of the things that we put together is something called the Mineral Securities Partnership, where we're pooling information and pooling resources with a number of other countries to be able to invest ourselves in critical minerals so that they're not dominated by any one country. We're working to build much greater supply chain resiliency, particularly among countries in that region. We have now about 17 economies that are part of this process to prevent near-term disruptions, to make sure that we develop early warning signals in case our supply chains are disrupted. And of course, for more fundamentally, helping these countries build out a significant amount of infrastructure. We're doing that through some of the funding we have in the budget for the Asia-Pacific. We also more broadly have something that the President established with the G7 called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. And that really runs the gamut. We've been able to generate investments, starting with government resources, but primarily getting the private sector to invest. We were the catalyst for it, in everything from Brazil nickel and cobalt mining to the Indonesian energy transition, a $20 billion investment in helping them make a transition, upgrading telecom networks in the Pacific Island countries, mobilizing investment capital for internet service providers in the region, as well as in Africa and Latin America, setting up vaccine manufacturing in Senegal, and rail linkages among countries in Africa, all of which deals with some of the challenges that China has posed in being able to have the field to itself in many of these areas. No longer the case. But there's an intense focus in the budget on the Indo-Pacific, more specifically, including a fund to focus infrastructure investment in the region.
Thank you. Wow, 7 minutes goes quick, Mr. Chairman,
It
or
does
8
when,
minutes.
It does when you're covering the world, or even a very specific part of the world.